So, hello everybody, and thank you for being with us for the presentation of the results of the current fiscal year, which is from the 1st of April to the 30th of September 2022. I'm Nicola Goulds from the Communications Service of Medincell, and this evening we have Christophe Douat, President of the company. Good evening. Also Raimond Arango, our CFO, and on my left, Richard Malamute, who is our medical director. Good evening, Richard.
Bonjour à tous. Hello all.
So today we published a press release with our consolidated financial results for the first 6 months, and the press release is available on our website. Before beginning the presentation of our financial results, I'd like to remind you that you can ask questions using the chat box on your screen, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. This meeting is interpreted simultaneously into English for the first time for our English-speaking friends, and it will last 1 hour maximum, so till 7:30 p.m. maximum. Before we come back over the financial results, I suggest that we come back over the figures. Raimé, we've seen extremely good things for Medincell recently and launch of third phase, and we're all waiting for the first product for 2023. But let's talk about figures first. The semester began with a request for additional information from the FDA for our first product. What were the consequences? Well, concretely, it's a delay of 10 months, more or less, with regard to our initial estimates for the launch of marketing, with obvious consequences on our financial strategy. We had planned a safety net. In particular, we had been in discussions with the European Investment Bank for a year to defer the repayment schedule of the first loan in 2018 and potentially benefit from additional financing. Finally, as you know, we have succeeded. We have signed a new 40 million euro loan with the EIB. But to be quite clear, out of the 14 million euros of this new loan from the EIB, 23 million euros will be used to reimburse this first loan and to pay for the interest. So, to delay the reimbursement to 2027, therefore there is an additional envelope that remains of 17 million euros net, 7 of which are immediately available, and we've already fulfilled those conditions, and 10 million of which depend on the approval of the MDC MRI by the FDA. Thank you, Raimé. Can you tell us about the company's financial situation? Yes, we have good cash visibility at least through to the end of the first quarter 2024. So a few figures. On the 30th of September, we have a cash flow of 14.2 million euros, of which 2.5 million are in non-risky investment. In our forecast for Treasury, we expect to receive more than 29 million euros in the first 6 months. So what is this? You saw last week we announced that we had received from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation $4 million to continue the development of the NDC-WWM project. And then to these 4 million, we can add the 17 million of the EIB loan. It's 17 million euros net, as we just said. There are also 4.2 million euros from the CIR, that is the tax relief for research at the beginning of 2021, and $4 million additional that we're expecting from the milestone of Teva upon the approval of MDC-WWM expected in the first half of 2023. However, we should note that within this cash forecast, we are not including any potential revenue that could come from new partnerships and licensing. Thank you, Raim. So yes, we can talk about this later, the new potential partners. We received a lot of questions about that. So let's come back over the past semester. Can you talk to us about revenue and expenditure? Of course, Nicola. So the figures for the period are as follow. In the top line, the revenue, we have 7.7 million euros, which is up, which has been practically doubled. And so it's up by 89% as compared to the first semester of the previous financial year. So in the 7.7, there are the $3 million of TEVA to move on to the MDC TJ-Key Phase 3. There is also the money received from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and also within the scope of new collaboration. And for the time being, this new collaboration focuses simply on feasibility studies. In terms of operating expenses, we've spent 19.4 million euros, which is up 27%, or 4.4 million euros as compared to the previous financial year. But this is normal, and this is something we had anticipated due to the progress of our programs. This 87% increase comes from development. So, at the end of the day, our cash consumption of cash flow related to our operations was 10 million euros. That is in line with our forecasts. So, all of this is aligned with our forecasts. So, in the press release we just published, maybe you haven't had time to read it, you're talking, Rémy, about an adaptation of our investment plan. What does that mean? Can you tell us a bit more about it? Of course, so after the delay of the launch of MDC IRM and given the situation on the financial markets, we adapted things to maintain healthy financial status and to maintain the development dynamics of our portfolio. So concretely, this means financing the company whilst protecting the interest of its shareholders. That is what we've done with the European Investment Bank. We also had to adapt our investments and increase our chances of creating value in the short term. So here are a few examples. We have intensified our efforts to quickly engage the right partner for our animal health program, and we've also decided that at this stage we will no longer invest alone in the MDC KPT project. We will look for a partner if the results of the current study are encouraging. Meanwhile, we're continuing to develop our portfolio with 2 internal programs, and we are going to continue our activities so that 3 programs can be ready for clinical development in 2023. Among these, 2 are funded respectively by the Gates Foundation and Unitaid. Thank you, Jaime. So, a very dynamic portfolio. Christophe, do you want to comment on anything that Jaime has just said? Yes, thank you, Jaime. It was very clear, and indeed, this loan from the EIB is an extraordinary event for the company. Biotex has just experienced its most serious financial crisis on the stock exchange. The value has been divided by 2, and then we have also had this answer from the FDA, and this loan is helping us to close that gap. As Bob said on the 3rd of November, and Eric will explain why, we're very optimistic about the approval of MDC RM and above all its potential. So follow this page. So Christophe, you're talking about TEVA. TEVA said that it had made a new application for marketing in September. Although you're expecting it, it is a very important piece of news for MedinCell. Of course, because it is the first product that will be marketed in America with MedinCell technology. And it's an amazing product, which is very differentiating. And it's a wonderful testimony of our technology and its power. This approval is a validation of this technology, so it's a key step that will necessarily speed up the business development, and we can see the premises of this. And in addition to that, it is increasing the validation of all of the pipeline. So it is a key step which makes us think that 2023 will be a great year. Yes, indeed, and we've prepared ourselves for this new step. Richard, let me turn to you. You're very familiar with the regulatory process in the United States. What will happen now for...
So, thank you. So just as a reminder, the CRL was filed, was received by TEVA in April of last year. And we can confirm that the CRL, the complete response letter, was focused on data derived from the phase 3 study that demonstrated efficacy of long-acting injectable risperidone for the treatment of schizophrenia. We know that the complete response letter did not address any concerns with MedinCell's technology, the polymer, or its manufacturing, which is good news for MedinCell. So now we've learned that Teva has addressed the concerns raised by the FDA and has refiled the NDA on or earlier than November 3rd, which is good news. So what happens next? So the FDA will receive the NDA resubmission, they'll review it, and assess it for the suitability for review and provide Teva with that notification in approximately a month after they receive it, that it will be reviewed. In that notification, they'll also provide Teva with a date by which they'll have to provide a response. That's called the PDUFA date. So we know that Teva will be hearing back from the FDA no later than first week in May. But I should add, based on what we know about the complete response letter and the complexity of the resubmission, it is entirely possible that Teva could receive news from the FDA much earlier than that, and we look forward to that. And the last thing I would say is that because of what we know was in the CRL and the data that had to be addressed, we're optimistic that the FDA will provide Teva with a favorable response on this review.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, indeed, we're all optimistic around this table about the FDA's response. So we're going to stay on Teva. The other good news of this quarter is Teva has decided to launch a phase 3 clinical study for the MDC-TJK.
Yeah. So the long-acting injectable olanzapine is the follow-up to the long-acting injectable risperidone, also for the treatment of schizophrenia. But it's complementary to risperidone. So first of all, both products will provide the same benefit in terms of ensuring compliance and preventing hospitalization and relapse of patients with schizophrenia when they don't take their medicine. But risperidone is used for more typical schizophrenia patients, while olanzapine is reserved for the use in patients who have more severe symptoms and or do not respond to typical therapy. So it will be used in a more severe group of patients. The other advantage over existing long-acting injectable olanzapines is that the current formulation requires the physician, after injection, to monitor the patient in the clinic for at least 3 hours for the signs of neuropsychiatric symptoms. This is a burden for the patient, for the physician, and their office. And Carl Schultz has said that based on the MedinCell technology and the new product, there's a potential to eliminate that need to monitor patients in the clinic. This should improve the utility and the utilization of the product and have it available for more patients with schizophrenia.
Thank you, Richard. So, Christophe, if we listen to what Richard's just said, this product could have a tremendous amount of potential. Yes, tremendous. And even more than the first one. For those who were not with us in our September conference, I can remind you of the context. So, risperidone and olanzapine have been two wonderful blockbusters in the pharmaceutical world. Both have, in the oral format, achieved more than 5 billion euros of sales per year. So it's among the 21st products in pharmaceutics at the time. The sales went down when the generic medicines came on the scene after the patent had fallen. There was Johnson & Johnson, olanzapine, and Lilly. So two wonderful pharmaceutical companies, and both companies followed the same strategy to preserve their franchise. But they made long-action injectables with new patents and maintaining the prices. They're treatments that are today sold for about $20,000 and $25,000 per year in the United States. Janssen succeeded. They replaced the 5 billion franchise of a franchise of more than 4 billion today, which is growing on average by 15% per year. So a tremendous success, but with the first generation products. And it is that franchise that Teva will be attacking with MDC-ERM, a very differentiating product of which we know the advantages and which were demonstrated in the clinical results for phase 3. So according to Zapine, the context is different. It really failed. So Richard explained clearly why, because the patients had to stay for 3 hours with a doctor close to an emergency service. And so it was a commercial failure. So we can see that thanks to our technology, Teva think that they can do away with this constraint. And that by do so, they could build a franchise that is equivalent, parallel to that of Janssen, according to Zapine, in a market where there is no competitor worthy of that name. So a very, very large potential. Thank you, Christophe, for these clarifications. Richard, let me come back to you. Do we know a bit more about this new phase 3? Could it be led more quickly by Teva?
So Teva has not yet released the details of their study protocol. We anticipate that they will release all the details just prior to first patient enrolled in their phase 3 study, which should occur sometime very early in 2023. And once that has happened, we look forward to speaking to all of you again and going through more of the details of the study and the implications on the development plan and timelines.
Thank you, Richard. So yes, we will communicate more about that as soon as we know more. Richard, we're staying with you. During the semester, you announced another phase 3. It was a few weeks ago, with this time our Canadian partner, AIC. Can you tell us about that product?
So as a reminder, AIC is our partner developing an intra-articular in the knee joint formulation of celecoxib. Celecoxib is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medication for pain associated with osteoarthritis. In this instance, the formulation is injected in the knee at the time of total knee replacement, which is a very painful surgery. So in the treatment of pain after surgery, after knee replacement surgery, the desire is to create analgesia for at least 3 days after surgery without the use of opioids. If you can achieve this, the belief is that it will limit the risk of opioid addiction after knee replacement surgery. Current formulations, current medications approved to treat pain after surgery don't last as long as 3 days. The AIC product went through phase 2 testing, in which not only was there demonstrable analgesic at 3 days versus placebo, but similar analgesia was demonstrated at 1 week, 2 weeks, and even 6 weeks after surgery, which is well beyond what existing products can do. This would be a tremendous game changer for patients. It should allow for early rehabilitation, early functional return of function, and should, maybe as important, limit the use of opioid after surgery. So the study itself is a 150-patient study, 75 patients receiving the intra-articular celecoxib, 75 patients receiving placebo. They'll be monitored in the hospital for 3 days after surgery to look at their immediate pain after surgery to that 3-day time point. They'll then be discharged and use an electronic diary to record their pain scores frequently over the next 3 months. Time points will include 1 week, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, and the primary endpoint for the study will be at 2 weeks after surgery. And I should add that this study has initiated, and the first patient was enrolled earlier last month, which is a major milestone for the start of any phase 3 study. And we look forward to continued recruitment and data that we hope to receive after analysis of the 3-month data sometime third, fourth quarter next year.
Merci, Richard, pour ces détails.
Thank you, Richard, for these details. And what will happen if the results are good at the end of next year?
Yeah. So this study was designed as a registration study. Now, once the data is analyzed, AIC will be able to assess whether the study met its endpoints to impact enough to to qualify as a registration study. Either way, the FDA requires 2 confirmatory studies for approval. So either AIC will need to conduct a second phase 3 study if this study not only is very positive but meets power needs to qualify as a registration study, or if the study is positive, it doesn't meet those requirements, AIC would need to conduct 2 studies in parallel. But it wouldn't impact the timelines, whichever scenario occurs. It would either be 1 study or 2 studies conducted in parallel.
Merci, Richard, pour ces précisions.
Thank you, Richard, on the clarifications of the future of this project with AIC. Once again, a product with a tremendous amount of potential. Christophe, before we move on to the questions and answers, would you like to say anything else about the past semester? Well, we've had some good clarification on the complete response letter, a timeline for the approval that we're waiting for. Of course, this 10-month waiting time was very frustrating, but we're all extremely optimistic about the approval, as is the president of Teva, as he said himself on the 3rd of November. What we see now is that during this period, we haven't been wasting time. The pipeline continued to progress because we have 2 projects which will be in phase 3 in 2023, and these are major events when we go into a phase 3 study. We have 3 products which should also reach a step where they're ready to go into clinical development, also major steps. 2 new products in formulation, as Jaime mentioned earlier on, which for the time being we're keeping confidential in terms of therapeutic indications, but we will speak in more detail about this in the coming months. A potential of licensing on products where we think that we've achieved important steps so that we can trigger this licensing. And thanks to this exposure, this visibility, we were in a conference with Jaime in London just 3-4 weeks ago, where people now know that Medincell is behind Uzedy, the nickname of this product based on risperidone. And this increasing exposure and increasing credibility means that we expect an increase in the number of partnerships, and I can say that we're waiting for this impatiently and that we're ready to go. Thank you, Christophe, for this very positive words on the future of their company. So now let's move on to the questions we've received. So I'm going to ask a few questions that we received ahead of time. Christophe, I'm turning to you to begin. The first question concerns the TTJ program. Where do we stand on this program? So in September, we're expecting the final results of the study, which will be analyzed in the coming weeks. We're a few weeks late. So it would be during the first quarter. As Jaime announced, in the scenario of encouraging results, we consider that now it would be essential for this program to find the right partner, to continue development and to go to the market. It's very important to back ourselves up with a good partner. Meanwhile, the COVID situation has evolved. First of all, we know that COVID is lasting. We can see the new variants. You can see the news in France with people obliged to wear masks again and the curves that are going upwards. But this pandemic has become endemic, and it has become, part of our everyday life. And the regulatory processes have been standardized with the processes of acceleration. But we know that we still need more effective protection tools in order to protect against infection, and in particular for certain segments of the population, such as those suffering from immunodeficiency. So the study will bring an answer according to the best standards of the industry, double-blind study with a double placebo control and an independent committee control, which is called DSMB in Europe. And therefore, this study will bring the necessary elements on the potential of ivermectin in prophylaxis against COVID. So we need to follow this, and it will be happening in 2023. So, Jaime, let me turn to you now. We have a number of questions. We already received a number of them. To recall the agreement between Medincell and Teva, the royalties, the milestones, etc. Can you remind us how all of this is organized? Yes, of course.
Dans le cas de ce contrat
So in the case of this TEVA contract, it is a standard contract of licensing with milestones and royalties. Milestones that can reach more than $120 million. But these milestones are split into two. The first is the development milestones, and then there are the marketing milestones. So we can take as an example the MDC IRM project. So the last development milestone that we're expecting are the $4 million that I talked to you about earlier on, which Medancel will be receiving upon the FDA approval. So from that point on, there are $100 or so million of marketing milestones, plus the royalties. So the marketing milestones, what are these? We won't receive them immediately, so we have to wait for TEVA to achieve a certain level of yearly sales in order to trigger, to trigger, he was looking for the word in French, so to trigger this payment of the milestones. So there are a number of stages that TEVA has to reach, but what's very important is that normally speaking, in the different scenarios that we're working on, the peak sales of, we can work on certain hypotheses, but we can hope that the product achieves these peak sales after 4 or 5 years. Which gives us trust in the future, as we've already said, that after these 5 years, we will be able to receive these hundreds of millions of dollars. And why is it important? I'm talking about 4 or 5 years, and let's come back to what we said on the European Investment Bank. We have the first goal of this negotiation with the EIB, which was to delay the reimbursement of the 2018 loan. So if we gain that in the coming days, we should be able to pay off this debt of 20 million euros at the end of 2027. And at the end of 2027, we will give the time to EUCD and TEVA to gain market shares and for us to receive more milestones and more royalties to pay off that debt. So the financial engineering is related to the market share of EUCD. And Jaime, if the dollar remains strong, it will be extremely favorable for our company. Absolutely.
Merci Jaime. Alors
Thank you, Jaime. Fred is also asking a question. Is it the same type of agreement for the new therapeutic indications of MDC IRM? Because TEVA decided to launch MDC IRM for new therapeutic indications. Is it the same type of agreement? Well, that's a very good question, but we're talking about a product. So whatever the therapeutic indications, this will not trigger milestones. However, the sales created for these new therapeutic indications will enter into the calculation of royalties. So they will add, if the program goes through to the end, it will be added to the first therapeutic indication of MDC. Thank you very much, Jaime, for these clarifications. We're going to continue with you. We've just received a question. You've answered it partially, but maybe you can add to this. Why did we borrow 4 million euros when we were expecting milestones and royalties from TEVA for IRM? Can you just re-clarify? So this is what we said about the safety net that we've started to plan. So MDC IRM has been delayed in its launch. We were expecting the launch to be done mid-2022, and it will actually be in the first semester of 2023. Meanwhile, we've been using up cash flow, and therefore we had to close this gap in the lack of income from MDC IRM. So we mustn't stay in a situation where the cash flow is too low. And we found a very good compromise here with a solution that's
ce filet de sécurité
makes
pour
our
pouvoir continuer à avancer
shareholders happy, but
sur les
which gives us
différents
a safety
projets
net to
que nous
continue to
avons aujourd'hui
progress
dans le
on the
pipeline.
different projects that we have in the
Merci
pipeline.
Jaime. Christophe,
Thank you,
je pense que
Jaime.
cette question
Christophe,
s'adresse à
I
toi.
think that this question is
Toujours
for
avec
you.
Teva, toujours sur le
So
projet,
still
sur le
about
produit
Teva
UZEDI,
and
donc
the
LDC IRM. On nous
I
demande est-ce
project.
qu'il y a un plan d'enregistrement
We're asked if
d'UZEDI
there
dans le reste
is
du
a
monde
registration
par
plan
Teva, par
in the
Medincell
rest of the
ou
world
par
by
quelqu'un
Teva,
d'autre.
Medincell, or by somebody else.
Alors, il est évident
Well,
que ce produit
quite
est
obviously,
important
this
pour
product
Teva.
is very important for Teva.
On sait que
We
c'est
know
un des
that
produits
it's one of the
majeurs qu'ils ont
main
dans
products that
leur
they
pipe de
have in their product
Il est
pipeline.
évident que
And
Teva
it's quite obvious
va
that
regarder
Teva
dans
will
d'autres régions du monde
look towards
pour le
other regions of the world
Et
to
d'abord, dans les
market
régions
it. And
qui
first and
acceptent,
foremost, in regions that accept
peu ou prou le régime
more or less
NDA. Et c'est
the
effectivement le
NDA
cas.
regime, and that's the case.
Envisage de le
Because
commercialiser
Teva
dans
is
d'autres régions
planning
du
to
monde
market
sous
it in
régime
other
NDA.
regions of the
Et
world
aussi
under
va
the NDA
évaluer,
regime, and will
l'opportunité
also assess
européenne,
the
sous régime
opportunities
EMA,
within Europe
de
in
ce
the
produit, maintenant qu'il est dérisqué.
regime, now
aux
that
États-Unis.
it is de-risked in the States.
Merci Christophe pour ces
Thank you, Christophe, for
précisions.
these
On reste avec toi,
clarifications.
Christophe.
So,
La
Christophe,
question, on l'a reçue
another question
énormément.
for
Est-ce
you,
qu'on peut en
a
dire
lot
un
of
peu
questions,
plus
same
sur
question.
ces
Can you
nouvelles
tell us a
prises de
bit more
contact,
about these new
partenariats engagés ces
contacts
derniers
and
temps? On a annoncé
partnerships in which you've
on a
engaged
annoncé
recently?
de nouvelles
We've announced new
collaborations, très early
collaborations.
stage, mais est-ce qu'on peut en dire un peu
Very
plus?
early
Est-ce qu'on
stage,
peut
but can you tell
préciser
us
les
more
aires
about that? Can we
thérapeutiques
clarify
sur
the
lesquelles nous
therapeutic
travaillons?
areas in which we're working?
Alors, je peux donner quelques indications
I
sans
can give
divulguer
a few ideas without
ni les
necessarily
partenaires ni les
revealing the
indications, parce qu'on est
partnerships or
sous
the
accord de
therapeutic indications
confidentialité.
because we have a
Et puis en plus,
confidentiality agreement.
dans les premières
And
étapes
in addition, in the first
de faisabilité, il y a beaucoup
feasibility
d'attrition.
stages, there's a lot of
On peut pas non plus,
attrition, so we don't want to
soulever des espoirs tant qu'on ne
raise
bascule pas
hopes
dans la phase de formulation.
until we get into the formulation phase.
On a cette année signé
This year we
plusieurs accords de
signed a number of
faisabilité
feasibility
dans ce qu'on appelle
studies
le secteur du
in which
système
we
nerveux
call
central,
the
un
central
secteur
nervous
qu'on connaît
system
bien,
sector, a sector that we're
on a un
very familiar
spécialiste,
with, and we have a
mais aussi dans
specialist
le
with us,
diabète, sur des
but also
projets
on
qui ont
diabetes,
tous
for projects which
potentiellement un
all
impact
potentially
majeur
will have a major
sur la santé.
impact on health.
Ce qu'on voit depuis
What
plusieurs mois,
we've been seeing in
et
recent
d'ailleurs
months,
paradoxalement,
and
la
paradoxally,
complete response letter nous a
the
fait de la
complete response
publicité,
letter
hein,
actually
et
did a
puis en
bit of
pharma,
advertising for
c'est
us.
un événement
And in pharmaceuticals,
qui est
it's an
commun,
event which is
Rick l'a
quite
expliqué.
common.
Je rappelle que c'est les deux tiers
As
des
we
projets
as we
en
explained it,
psychiatrie
it's
passent par
about
cette étape.
2/3 of
Mais néanmoins,
psychiatric
ça
products
met
go
la
through
société
that
en
step.
lumière, et ça
But
montre aux gens
nevertheless, it puts a
qu'on était
spotlight on the
veille,
company,
potentiellement d'une
and it
approbation.
shows us that we're at the eve of
Et
an approval.
on a des contacts maintenant
And we now
avec des sociétés
are in
pharmaceutiques
touch with
qui dans le
pharmaceutical
passé
companies which in the past
regardaient Medincell un peu
were
avec
looking
dédain.
at Medincell with
mais
a
maintenant, on nous
a
prend
little
au sérieux,
disdain,
on nous prend
but
au sérieux
now
parce
we're
que le
taken
produit
seriously because
terminé
the
phase 3
product
avec
has
des
completed
résultats,
phase 3 with
que Karl Schulz, le CEO Teva, qualifie de
results
spectaculaires,
that
de phénoménaux.
Carl Schulz in Teva
Et,
is saying are
et on
absolutely
voit
amazing,
nos équipes dans le
phenomenal.
business
And we
développement,
see
là,
our
qui sont à
teams
fond en ce
in
moment,
the
parler
development
à des niveaux qu'on n'avait pas avant.
talking about levels that we never
Maintenant,
had,
il faut
talking at
que ça
levels
se
that we've never seen
concrétise,
before. So all of
que,
this now has to
les
actually
projets
come
avancent,
into
ça prend du temps.
life.
En tout
So
cas,
projects are
ça
moving
présage d'un
forward, so
bel
it takes
avenir,
time, but it
pour la
does
société.
look like the
Merci,
company has a bright
Christophe,
future.
pour ces précisions.
Thank you, Christophe, for
Richard,
these
je vais me
clarifications.
tourner vers
Richard,
toi
I'm
maintenant.
going to turn to you
On nous
now.
pose la question,
The
on l'a
question
déjà dit, mais peut-être
is, and
on
we've
va
already had
répéter,
it, but maybe
combien de
repeat it,
temps pour
how
finir
much
la
time
phase
do we
3
need to finish the
projet
phase 3 of the
MDC-CWM
MDC-CWM project with our Canadian AIC
rappeler,
partner?
en cas de
And can
succès
you
de
recall
cette
us,
phase 3,
if this
quelle est la
phase is
suite
successful,
envisagée pour ce
what
projet?
next for this product?
Sure. So, so the phase 3 will gather recruiting now. We'll have its primary analysis complete by third quarter of next year. We may be able to disclose results into early fourth quarter. And at that point, AIC will make an assessment of the data, the strength of the data, and whether the data qualifies to be a registration study for filing with the FDA. Either way, the positive results will trigger a second phase 3 study. The FDA requires 2 confirmatory studies for approval. If the study is positive but doesn't qualify as a registration study, then AIC would need to conduct 2 phase 3 studies, but these would be done in parallel, so there would be no impact on the timelines to approval.
And I think we should say, Rick, that
Christophe,
So, Christophe, I would like you to remind that you have to speak in French because it is being broadcasted simultaneously in French and in English. Yes, no, of course, this is something we're discussing with Richard as well, is that this study that's underway that's just beginning will be essential and will bring us elements that can also facilitate partnerships around that project. And that the later phase 3 studies could be led by partners, because this project, as Rick explained earlier on, there's really a shift in paradigm in a field which is extremely active. And once again, a partner can bring power to our development and guarantee a future marketing. So.
Yeah, and if I could add just one more thing to that, just as with the phase 3 results in long-acting injectable risperidone added credibility and support for MedinCell's technology as a subcutaneous formulation, so too will positive results in an intra-articular study also lend the same sort of support and credibility and belief in success with future intra-articular products using the MedinCell technology.
Merci, Richard. Effectivement,
le produit MedinCell. Yes, thank you. That will bring more credibility in another field of application for our technology. Let's move on to another question regarding our partnership with Bill and Melinda Gates over MDC-WWM. We're asking questions for developing countries where MedinCell retains the rights for marketing. Do you have an idea about the size of the market, targeted Europe, the States, etc.? Yes, this is a project that we began as an internal MedinCell project. It's a MedinCell project to start with. And the foundation has been funding so far in order to own the rights for humanitarian application. In the States, the contraception market represents about 5 billion, so a lot is oral contraception, but 1/3, about 1.5 billion, is what we call long-action contraceptives, intrauterine, etc. And so this product will also be a shift in paradigm, because we're talking about a 6-month injection. Bioresorbable, self-injectable, subcutaneous, and ready to use. Therefore, a product that does not exist on the market with new generation contraceptives. So this is an exceptional product which, in addition, in the complex environment of birth control in the United States, could have an important role to play. So real commercial potential for that product. However, it will take time, because we're talking about a 6-month injection. Therefore, each test takes 6 months or more. With clinical trials, you have to repeat the injections. Therefore, it is a program that will take time to develop, but which will also consolidate its anti-competition position with regard to future generics. And so it will have a long life ahead of it.
Merci, Christophe.
Thank you, Christophe, for these clarifications. So I'm going to ask you the question, Christophe, and maybe Richard can add to this. The question is, can you collect biomarkers in the ivermectin study? I'm not sure if we're talking about the study for MDC-TTJ or MDC-STM, the two studies that use ivermectin, to have a clear idea of the mechanisms, anti-inflammatory mechanisms, and this would enrich the knowledge on the properties of this molecule.
Rick, maybe you can...
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Richard.
Yeah, sure. No, happy to. Yeah,
Richard, on peut dire qu'on t'appelle Rick.
Actually, we can say we call you Rick.
Richard.
Yeah, Rick. Richard.
Bien sûr. I mean, of course. So, if we're talking about the ivermectin for the treatment of exposure to COVID, the study is complete. So no additional tests can be added, of course. But there are different types of biomarkers. And there were some clinical biomarkers and predictive biomarkers that were included in the study. For instance, we know that the variant of COVID is important in assessing the effect of any treatment for COVID. And so we carefully collected the type of variant in the study. And the first part of the study included patients mostly affected with BA 1.1, and the second part of the study included mostly patients with BA 5. So we'll do that comparison. We'll make similar comparisons for demographics, comorbidities that we know can worsen disease, severity of symptoms, hospitalizations, and so on. So while we didn't collect true inflammatory biomarkers with the study, we will still have some clinical biomarkers that will be quite interesting to interpret.
Merci Richard pour ces précisions.
Thank you, Richard, for this clarification. Christophe, I'm turning to you for this question. We've announced that we should have 3 new products that are entering clinical phase next year. One of them is MDC-GRT, and the question is Medincell planning to develop it alone, and if so, to what stage?
Alors, pour rappel,
so as a reminder, MDC-GRT is a long-action version of the anti-rejection medication for transplants. Today, between 20–30% of the organs transplanted are transplanted in patients that have rejected the organs due to a lack of observance. And so one of the interests of this product, which can be multiplied by a potential reduction of the toxicology of this drug. We know that for people who are familiar with people who have been transplanted, that it creates renal toxicity, which is not very good, but also it creates 20% of induced diabetes. So there are hypotheses, scientific hypotheses, which say that with a subcutaneous version, and we go around the digestive system and the hepatic system, and by reducing the dose, we can might have an effective impact. So a major project. And with a drug which, and Eric can maybe add some information about this, which has inherent toxicity. Therefore, it's important to achieve this first stage, which shows that our project is safe. Rick, you can...
Yeah, so absolutely. So the safety concerns of tacrolimus are real. Patients often discontinue their therapy because of the development of high blood sugars and diabetes, potassium changes, and renal dysfunction, among others. So being able to maintain patients on their medication by mitigating the safety tolerability complaints will provide overall benefit on preventing organ rejection. But even beyond that, the fact is that patients who take tacrolimus are not always, like all patients, are not always compliant with their medications every day. And for many medications, if you miss your drug, you miss your dose for a day, maybe 2, there's no real impact or harm caused. But for a drug like tacrolimus, which is very dependent on having adequate blood levels to prevent organ rejection, missing doses or being non-compliant with your drug can have a severe impact by lowering the amount of tacrolimus in your blood and increasing the chances of the very serious organ rejection. So having a long-acting formulation, apart from improving safety, tolerability, by maintaining patients' blood levels of tacrolimus and limiting the chance of non-compliance, will have a huge impact on these patients' lives.
Prescription va avoir un impact important sur la vie des patients. Thank you, Richard. Once again, a project that can have a very good impact on patients. So this brings us to the end of the questions. Christophe, maybe you can take the floor for a few last words. So thank you for being with us once again this evening. As you can see, the company is moving ahead. The entire team is behind me, so that 2023 is a great year. I wish all of you great holidays at the end of the year. Thank you for your patience, and see you very soon in 2023. And thank you to all of you for having been with us for this conference, and see you soon.